Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. Today we're going to look at a very unusual case from Germany. Before we begin though, I just want to give a quick shout out to Silence1 on Instagram. He really helped me out with this video because a lot of the information was in German and Google Translate can only do so much. So I'll put a link to Silence's Instagram page and go check him out. He does some really amazing artwork. I've even got some up on my wall at home. Give him a follow. I'll put a link in the description. So, the chopper incident. It began in May 1981 in a town called Neutraubling in southern Germany. Dr. Kurt Bachseitz, the local dentist, was at work in his clinic when the phone rang. When he answered, he was disturbed to hear a low, guttural voice on the other end shouting obscenities at him. Dr. Bachseitz hung up. He was bemused and a little unsettled. Little did he know that this would be the beginning of a string of nuisance phone calls. Each time the calls were the same, a deep, croaking, potty-mouthed voice hurling obscenities. There were 3 people at the dental clinic, Dr. Bachseitz and his wife Margot, plus their 16-year-old assistant Claudia Judenmann. If Dr. Bachseitz saw his wife answer the phone, the voice would simply hurl insults and mock them. But if Claudia answered, it would try to flirt with her in unsettling ways, making lewd suggestions and professing its undying love for her. The voice called itself Chopper. Whoever Chopper was, he was persistent. Over the following weeks, the calls would increase in frequency until they were receiving multiple phone calls every single day. Dr. Bachseitz had had enough. He contacted the Deutsche Bundespost, the German post office, and he reported this harassment. The Bundespost sent technicians to the dental clinic and they installed an intercept circuit on the line in the hope of finding out where the phone calls were coming from. This did seem to work. The incessant phone calls stopped, but it didn't stop Chopper from intruding on their lives. In fact, it caused the harassment to escalate in an alarming way. Now, instead of phoning the clinic directly, Chopper began to interrupt outgoing calls from the dentist's office. Whenever Dr. Bachseitz or Claudia tried to phone somebody from the office, the rasping voice of Chopper would cut in on their call, screaming his usual obscenities. Now Chopper wasn't just some nuisance caller, he was somebody with the ability to tap into private phone calls. The Bundespost spent a considerable amount of time and money investigating this case, but they couldn't figure out how Chopper was interrupting the calls. They ripped out and replaced all of the phones and phone cables in the clinic building. This operation cost the Bundespost 60,000 marks. When they were finished, Chopper interrupted the very next phone call, stating, "I still have a clear line." Over the following months, Chopper continuously interrupted their phone calls, and he began making very creepy comments about the things that Claudia had been doing outside the office. He seemed to have knowledge of what she did in her own house. It seemed that he had been observing her in private. The situation reached a critical point in November when Chopper threatened to kill Claudia. At this point, the police got very seriously involved. Recently, there had been a number of young girls murdered in southern Germany and the killers hadn't been caught. In July of 1981, a 13-year-old girl named Sonja Hurler had gone missing whilst walking to her grandmother's house in Kempten. This was a few hours' drive from Neutraubling. 3 months later, her body was found dumped beneath a barn. She'd been sexually assaulted and murdered. One of the most disturbing murders had happened at almost the same time that Claudia had received her death threats. This was the case of Ursula Herrmann, a 10-year-old girl who, on the 15th of September, disappeared whilst riding her bike in the Weingarten forest next to Ammersee Lake. This is about an hour-and-a-half drive from Neutraubling. 2 days after Ursula disappeared, her parents began receiving strange phone calls. These calls consisted of a recording of the Bayern 3 radio station jingle. They also received a ransom note asking for a sum of money, but then no further instructions were left on where to leave the money. 4 weeks after Ursula vanished, police found her body in the Weingarten forest. She'd been buried beneath the ground in a small wooden box. The box was equipped with lights, blankets, food, a radio tuned to Bayern 3, and a bucket for a toilet. A ventilation system consisting of pipes camouflaged with leaves was installed. It seemed that her kidnappers had intended her to spend a long time in the box whilst they waited for the ransom money to arrive, but unfortunately, damp leaves on the forest floor clogged the ventilation pipes, and Ursula had suffocated a few hours after being placed in the box. Obviously, with these stories hitting the headlines at around the same time that Claudia was receiving her threatening phone calls, it was important that the police were seen to be doing something. They began searching nearby houses and they interrogated anyone living in the vicinity of the dental clinic. One neighbour was a prime suspect. This was a man who had had surgery on his larynx, so he had a very distinctive raspy voice. He was also a ham radio enthusiast. It was thought that he might have been using his radio equipment to somehow intercept the dentist's phone calls, but no conclusive evidence was ever produced against him. The investigations continued on fruitlessly for months. 1981 passed into 1982. Still, Chopper continued to harass the dentist and his assistant, and still the police and the Bundespost had no idea who was behind it. Then, in February, events took another sinister turn. Dr. Bachseitz and Claudia were in the dentist clinic when they heard, clear as day, the voice of Chopper coming from the drain in the wash basin. It seemed that Chopper had moved on from harassing them via the telephone. Now he was using the plumbing. From then on, the voice of Chopper manifested inside the room multiple times a day. Sometimes it would appear to be coming from the plug hole of the basin, or it would come from an electrical outlet or the light fitting. One time it terrified a customer by shouting from inside the toilet bowl whilst she was sat on it. As always, Chopper was abusive and obscene. Usually the target of his comments were customers who were sat in the dentist's chair. He would make insulting comments about their looks, or accuse them of being scared, or tell them to shut their mouths. It began to affect business, and pretty soon terrified customers were avoiding the dental clinic like the plague. Word began to spread about Dr. Bachseitz's ghost. It didn't take long for the press to get wind of the story, and soon an article was published in a local paper. After that, the story spread even further. Soon, newspaper reporters from further afield, along with paranormal research groups, psychics and scientists, began visiting the clinic, and from there it just snowballed. It wasn't long before the story got international attention. Within a space of a few weeks, reporters and investigators from all over the world began flying into Neutraubling in the hopes of meeting Chopper for themselves. Many theories were put forward as an explanation for the voice. Maybe there was someone with speakers hidden in the walls, or perhaps it was just an act of ventriloquism. Perhaps someone was in the sewers speaking through the pipes. One theory was that the dental clinic had been built over the site of an old World War II Messerschmitt aircraft factory. It was thought that the factory might have had secret tunnels underneath, and these tunnels might still be in place beneath the clinic, giving someone the means to transmit their voice into the building without being seen. Ultrasound equipment was brought in to try and find evidence of this, but nothing was ever proven. With the media frenzy surrounding the dental clinic, Claudia found herself the centre of attention. The only person that Chopper seemed to like was Claudia. In fact, he was infatuated with her. She seemed to be the only person who could prompt Chopper into speaking.
Chopper, Chopper? Chopper, hast du jetzt gehört, was wir jetzt geredet haben gerade vorhin?
Alles gehört.
Alles gehört, so. Naja, warum sagst du jetzt nichts? Chopper.
Claudia allein.
Ja.
Claudia didn't shy away from this attention either. She seemed to love having the cameras on her. The newspapers painted her as some sort of medium, the girl who was able to speak to the dead, the girl with the ghostly admirer. Pretty soon she was being offered huge sums of money to appear on chat shows. Apparently also she recorded a pop song about Chopper. In the space of a few weeks, Claudia had become a star and Neutral Bling had become a freak show. Crowds of people would appear on the street outside the clinic, whilst an endless stream of TV cameras, reporters, psychics and paranormal investigators tried to get access to the building. The police, who were probably embarrassed by their inability to crack the case, set up a task force named Socko Geist, or the Special Ghost Commission. This was a crack team of investigators from Munich determined to get to the bottom of the thing. The Socko Geist team spent several days in the clinic, observing everyone carefully, trying to determine where the voice was coming from. Reportedly during this time the phenomena escalated even more. The Socko Geist team reported some poltergeist-like activity, furniture and ornaments falling over or seeming to be thrown from an unknown source. Despite this, the team were somewhat skeptical of this ghost, and they were carefully observing the movements of everyone in the building, paying special attention to people's positions in the room when the phenomena occurred. Claudia especially seemed to be acting suspiciously sometimes. On one occasion the voice of Chopper was heard coming from the toilets. A police officer ran to the bathroom door and pulled it open just to find Claudia inside. She seemed dazed and she claimed that Chopper had somehow compelled her to go there. They noticed how the voice usually appeared when Claudia had her back to the room. Unfortunately for Claudia, there was a mirror on the wall where she often stood. The next time Chopper made an appearance, a policeman watched Claudia's reflection in the mirror very closely. As he suspected, her lips moved as Chopper spoke. It was Claudia that was producing the voice. After that, Claudia, Dr. Bachseitz and his wife were taken in for questioning, and this is where things get a little murky in the reporting. You see, I've read a lot of different articles about this case, and most of them state that after being interrogated, the three of them broke down and they confessed to faking the entire thing. End of story. But I'm not sure if this paints a completely accurate picture of what happened here. According to articles like this, Claudia only made a partial confession and then afterwards refused to testify in court. As far as I can tell, Claudia always maintained that she was a little bit responsible for the Chopper phenomena. One of the best papers I've read on the Chopper case, written by Gerhard Meyer, which I'll link in the description, has this to say on the issue. In a TV talk show long after the solving of the case, Claudia again confessed that she was responsible for some of the occurred voice phenomena and that she furthermore assumed that Bachseitz also took part in the game. However, she said that there must have been a third ghostly voice whose originator she didn't know. This big unknown had been the instigator of her own Chopper activity. After receiving anonymous calls for several weeks from someone using a disguised voice, she began to reply and the game began. So it seems that Claudia, by her own admission, was making up at least some of the voice, but not all of it. As far as motivation goes, there's multiple reasons why a teenage girl might do something like this. In Chopper, she had the ability to break social taboos by hurling insults at the adults around her without any repercussions. By having Chopper fall in love with her, she became the centre of attention. When the press started to arrive, she became the main character in the case, the focus of every camera. As for Dr. Bachseitz and his wife, the motivation is a lot less clear. These were two serious and respected people in the community. The chopper phenomena negatively impacted the business, and it caused them a great deal of embarrassment and distress. It was Dr. Bachsites who originally contacted the police to try and stop the voice, so it seems very out of character that he would go along with it. However, there is eyewitness testimony of a police officer witnessing Dr. Bachsites producing the chopper voice. In this article, they have a quote from a police officer who was there at the time. After witnessing some poltergeist-like activity, it says that suddenly Mr. Bachsites lost it. "Bullen, Bullen," he yelled with Chopper's voice. It was truly terrifying. Now, this doesn't sound like Dr. Bachsites was trying to hide the fact that he was producing Chopper's voice. It seems more like he was doing it openly, as if possessed, or at least trying to appear as if possessed. I've spoken in other videos about the phenomenon of the folie à deux, a mental delusion that affects multiple people at the same time. I do wonder if something like this happened here. Something that started out as a prank but became real, at least in the minds of Mr. and Mrs. Bachsites. At one point, they were getting harassed by phone calls hundreds of times a day. This would be enough to strain anyone's mental health. And then after it all, they have the voice manifest itself inside the room with them. Who knows how that would affect someone psychologically? Chopper could have been an obsession for them, something that solidified in their minds like a thought form or tulpa, an entity that began to influence their actions. Dr. Bachsites did confess to producing the voice sometimes, although again it was just a partial confession. He confirmed that some of the time the voice was coming from him, but that he must have been doing it subconsciously, and in the end he always felt that he wasn't guilty of hoaxing any of the phenomena. There's also the issue of how they made the voice. How 3 different people could produce the same guttural sound is interesting in itself, but then how did they make it come from different parts of the room, making it sound like it was coming from light fittings and toilet bowls? This is another place where the details get a bit murky depending on what articles you read. Different sources give different explanations on how this was achieved. According to this article, Claudia confessed that she'd created the ghost voice with the help of commercially available cheap effects devices and her own vocal power. The article also says that the Bachsites couple finally admitted that they'd used the in-house telephone system with disguised voices. This article claims that tape recorders were found hidden in the pipes of the dentist's office. According to this article, the two had taken advantage of the special acoustics of the tiled practice and created the obscene sounds using pure vocal acrobatics. This article says that the voice of the ghost was faked through tubes linked to the plumbing. Somewhere else I read that they might have hidden themselves in wall cavities. Annoyingly, I can't find the article to screenshot it now, but the point is, there doesn't seem to be much consensus on how exactly the voice was faked. My guess is that most of these explanations are just speculations. Someone came up with an idea of how the phenomena could have been achieved, and journalists who wanted a neat way of wrapping up the story said, "Yep, that explains it," and printed it as fact. So we have slightly dubious confessions and dubious explanations. I do wonder, in that grey area, does it leave any possibility of Chopper being real? I mean, probably not, most likely just a prank, but pretty much every poltergeist case has some element of human trickery. Read up on the Enfield poltergeist or Jeff the Talking Mongoose. You'll see that in both these cases, there were times when investigators caught people trying to fake the ghostly phenomena, but other times they experienced voices or thrown objects that seemed completely unexplainable. Some investigators concluded that the Chopper case was a mixture of human hoax and genuine paranormal phenomena. Maybe that's just cope because they didn't want to admit to being fooled, or maybe, just maybe, they witnessed something that they couldn't explain. In the aftermath of the Chopper case, for all the time and money that they'd wasted and the chaos that they'd caused, Claudia was fined 1,500 marks. Kurt and Margot Bachsites were fined 35,000 marks. Afterwards, Claudia tried to distance herself from the case, and she eventually changed her name to avoid being recognised. For Dr. Bachsites and his wife, it seems that the stress of the chopper incident plus the public backlash afterwards was way too much for them to handle. Soon after the case ended, they admitted themselves to a mental hospital and the dental clinic was closed. And that's pretty much where the tale of Chopper ends. Why the name Chopper, I'm not sure. I've heard some suggestion that it might be because Claudia was a fan of motorbikes. In England, the word chopper has other connotations, but I don't think that's the case in Germany. Maybe it's the ghost of a mad axe murderer or something. So I'll end it there. Thanks once again to Silence for helping me out with the translations and stuff. Go check out his Instagram and give him a follow, link in the description. And as always, thank you to the patrons for supporting the channel. I hope you found the video interesting. Until next time, goodbye.